What was the biggest reason to dump the energy in Guild Wars 2? Because it's in PvP it was a really big role to manage your energy in Guild Wars 1.
So the biggest thing about it is managing energy in Guild Wars 2 was very different. You know, and we find it to be a lot more fun this way when we removed energy, because before it would just kind of go down, and once you ran out of energy, you didn't really have a lot of options. And the main thing that we were really enjoying out of energy is the way it was limiting dodging around the map. And so we decided to just split out dodging from the energy mechanic, which really gave us a lot more options on how to play around with it. And you really weren't managing energy in Guild Wars 2 because there really wasn't anything that kind of increased it or played around with it. You really weren't having people take away your energy, and there wasn't a whole energy game like there was in Guild Wars 1. And so it was really kind of a whole kind of efficiency game that we were playing before. And then we found that we were already playing that game with recharges. And so you're kind of already playing two games. And so we decided to just remove one, make things a lot more simple, and then it gave us a lot more play with how we could manipulate dodging. We made dodging more powerful. Before it didn't do evade when you rolled around, and you could do it a lot more often. And so it wasn't as powerful. And so this way we controlled that you could dodge a little bit less, but it made it a lot more powerful. And it allows us to manipulate it a little bit stronger. Like we could do things like a thief who currently has kind of limited things that he can do in a support role. He can kind of cloak some allies in different ways. But now we could give him a skill that says, okay, refill all my allies' dodge meter, and that would give him an ability to, be a support character in a very different role. And so it's kind of a very new mechanic, and we're going to experiment with how we can manipulate it. But now it's a lot more manipulatable. It's a bar that we can maneuver, play around with, manipulate in a lot more interesting ways, where before it was more of an attrition mechanic. And so that's kind of the reason why we removed it, made the game simpler, and allowed us to manipulate the game in a more interesting way.
In Guild Wars 1, each max level character had like 480 HP. And is it the same? I mean, like now we saw in the demo, it was like level 80 character. I don't know, you haven't talked about max level yet, but have you finalized the specs, like the base HP per class? Is it going to differ per class or per race, or the base that like intelligence and strength and stuff like that? So can you talk about that, or is it still confidential?
Yeah, so once you have a max spec class in Guild Wars 2, the max HP will be different for each class. So let me give you two examples. A warrior max spec is going to have about 24,000-ish HP. Now a guardian, who is also heavy armor, is only going to have about 16,000. But he has a lot of ways to regen, and he has a lot of ways to block incoming attacks. So even though he has a lower max HP, he plays really differently because he has this constant regen. He has Aegis, which you saw us using today. So you can time that. If you see a big hit coming from somebody, you can pop your Aegis. You can activate it, block that hit. You might have just saved yourself 3,000 or 4,000 HP of damage. So those two classes are good examples of how the max HP will be different, and because of that difference, we can do a lot of different things with all the classes to make them feel really unique on the battlefield.
So, who's next?
Will there be anything like the fractions in Guild Wars Factions?
What was that?
Like the Kurzik or the Luxon, will there be anything like that in Guild Wars 2?
So you're talking about the Luxon and the Kurziks?
Yeah, if there will be different factions in the game.
So there are player organizations that you can join, which are very similar to that in the sense that you're going to have a lot of identity that comes from those organizations. But for PvP, we don't have anything like that currently planned. So that's not something we're looking at right now. Now, having said that, in World versus World, a lot of your identity will be tied to which side you represent, what server you represent. That'll become a very big part of your identity. So in that sense, your server and his server, they might not get along, and you're going to know that. So rather than being Luxon and Kurzik, you're going to know that server and be like, I don't like those guys. And they're going to say, we don't like those guys. And you're going to say, let's go settle it on World versus World. Let's go settle this. So that's kind of the way that you're going to identify yourself in World versus World is based off the servers.
I've got two questions. When a hot join match is finished, will there start a new match with the same group, or will you get teleported back from where you start from?
So we haven't finalized all the details on that. But right now, the way that it's working currently is it recycles the same map. Later, there will be different settings for different maps that you can play. So, for instance, you could set up queues of different servers that you would want to play on. Different maps would actually cycle through those, or you could just play the same map over and over again if that's what you wanted to do.
I think what he's actually asking is, will it be like a random arena now that you basically the winner stays and gets like a different team playing against them?
Currently, that is not the way it works for competitive PvP. Once we release a little bit more stuff, a little bit more info about how the competitive P will be structured on the back end, we'll answer a lot of those questions that you obviously are having, and it'll make a lot more sense on how that stuff is going to work.
My second one, you say you can join a hot join match from everywhere, so you can join a match which started 5 minutes ago. So it could be that the other team is winning, it's really good, and in your team it's every second there's a new player, and so you can't really get into the game and can't win it. How do you handle this?
So the way the kind of casual PvP, which is a little more hot joinable, is kind of structured is a little closer to an FPS structure, right? You're able to kind of jump in, play the game, and yeah, sometimes you jump into the middle of a game, but usually don't just jump in for one match. You jump in, you play, you hang out for a while, and the match goes on and on for a while. And so the idea is that we're kind of changing paradigms to a different structure there. And so it is the case that you can go in, play for a while, and leave, but the map is kind of a different entity, right? You'll stay in a map and you'll be able to play. People will come and go, but this map's going to cycle and the game's going to keep cycling, and you're going to be playing and playing, which is very similar to the way a lot of FPS games run their maps and their cycles and their games. Then there's the tournaments, which are very typical match. You go in, you do the match is over, your team comes out, and your team will be waiting for another match. And that's kind of how our automated tournaments worked in Guild Wars 1. And so those are kind of two different structures. And so the casual side is going to be a little more on that other structure, and the tournament side is going to be more like our Guild Wars 1 structure with our automated tournaments was.
Okay, I think we have time for 2 more questions. Yeah, you have to get closer to the stage. I can't reach that far.
Will there be points to earn in competitive PvP just to spend at new skills or something like that, like in Guild Wars 1?
So we will have some sort of reward mechanic, but like I said, we're really working on the core gameplay right now. We have a lot of plans for our reward mechanic, but we're really not releasing that information right now. We got to get a lot of that stuff implemented, play around with it, iterate it before we start talking about the stuff. We really like to talk about stuff when we finished it, when we're really want to show it to everyone, and so we got to do a lot more work on that. But we're really focused on the core gameplay mechanics right now, and we'll talk more about the rewards at a later time.
Okay, last question somewhere over there. Who of you 3-1? I don't know, just one.
Since your PvP is really based around structure and competitive, will there be a spectating system so that when guilds battle each other, you can actually do a live stream and don't always have to watch through one player's eyes, sort of?
So we haven't talked about observer mode yet, but it is one of those things, like as he says, we are currently working on a lot. And by currently working on, that means that people like me and Izzy, we are looking at every competitive game that's out and looking at how they do the observer system, and we're taking the best ideas we can find from the cutting edge, and we're really trying to refine something that's going to work for Guild Wars 2. Now, what's interesting about Guild Wars 2 is it has a lot of different aspects of strategy. So it has the first-person shooter aspect, as you've seen, moving around. It also has a lot of strategy, moving around and capture a map. So we're going to come up with a new observer system that we think fits GW2 the best, but we haven't exactly decided on those details yet. But we are really watching for those things. We want to make an esport, so we want to make something that's going to support the esport observers.
Yeah, and as always, we love PvP, we love all those systems, and we're going to really just focus on the core mechanics of the game. All those supporting elements, we'll do our best to get all those things in, but the main focus of the game right now is getting the core pieces in, and that's really what matters. When we have more details about those other stuff, we'll release them, but as always, we don't really talk about anything until we're sure of it, because we don't want to talk about stuff unless we know we're going to have it.
All right. A big hand for Jonathan Sharp and Isaiah Cartwright. Thanks for being here, guys, and answering all those questions.